in the aftermath of World War II, a small town in Tennessee became a battleground for one of the most dramatic and courageous acts of defiance in American history. Imagine coming home from fighting for freedom abroad only to find your hometown ruled by corruption and fear. This was the harsh reality faced by a group of battle-hardened veterans who returned to Athens, Tennessee, only to discover that their fight for justice was far from over. With their community held hostage by a corrupt political machine, these veterans made a bold decision that would change the course of history. So, how did these ordinary citizens restore justice and reclaim their town? Well, let's see. Athens, Tennessee in the 1940s was a small rural town in McMinn County. And like many communities in the American South, Athens was a close-knit town where everyone knew each other and life revolved around agriculture, local businesses, and church meetings. But the city's politics were far from idyllic. Athens was run by a political machine that controlled society in ways that served its interests, rather than the citizens. This political machine was run by Paul Cantrell, who had been associated with corruption and abuse of power. When he was elected McMinn County Sheriff in the mid-1900s, his campaign received significant support from the Democratic establishment, which was looking to expand its power in Tennessee. Cantrell came from a wealthy and influential family near Etowah, and he quickly used his position to build support and control throughout the city for a decade. His administration was marked by a ruthless determination to maintain power, which often led to intimidation and fraud during elections, which discredited his continued rule. Central to the corrupt practices of Cantrell's regime was the free system. Under the system, the sheriff and his deputies were paid a fee for every person they arrested, incarcerated, and released. This regulation turned the law into a profitable business that encouraged the police to arrest citizens for even the most minor offenses, whether they were guilty or not. Cantrell and his cronies expanded their operations to include kickbacks from illegal gambling, prostitution, and bootlegging operations that thrive under their protection. This misconduct that the police were supposed to stop became a huge issue because the police department turned a blind eye to the profits. Corruption was so rampant that it was known throughout Tennessee that Athens was open and that the laws could be sold to the highest bidder. But all was coming to a stop. When World War II veterans returned to Athens, Tennessee, they eagerly waited to return to the normalcy and peace they fought to preserve. But what awaited them in Athens was far from the welcome they deserved. Instead of finding a community willing to embrace them, these veterans faced injustice and oppression from a local government that saw them not as heroes, but as easy targets for exploitation. Cantrell's agents were so accustomed to corruption that they saw returning veterans as nothing more than new opportunities to amass their fortunes. The fee system, which gave police rewards for every arrest and detention, had become a tool of oppression. Veterans returning from the horrors of war found themselves wrongly arrested, fined, and shamed by the very authorities that were supposed to protect them. Many had returned with a small payment, making them prime targets for Paul Cantrell. These veterans were stopped on the street, charged with serious crimes such as public drinking, and thrown in jail. Once there, they had to pay heavy fines or face long prison sentences. This treatment was not only a violation of their rights, but also a cruel fate for those who risked their lives to protect the freedom that were being crushed by the local government. With time, the situation started getting worse. Discontent among the veterans was growing, leading to a deep sense of injustice and a realization that the principles they defended in the war were being undermined in their own country. So they met in secret to discuss the corruption that was ravaging the city and ways to combat it. Many had hoped to leave the violence of the war behind them, but the brutal abuse of local authorities left them with no choice. However, attempts to resolve these issues through the courts or appeals to national authorities were met with indifference or outright opposition. So they did the unexpected. As the veterans in Athens, Tennessee grew frustrated with the corruption that had gripped their town, they realized that they needed relevant and compelling responses that could channel their anger and frustration into meaningful change. This recognition led to the formation of the Non-Partisan American Servicemen's Alliance, a political movement focused on challenging local governments through democratic processes. The organization was founded by World War II veterans who had proven their commitment to freedom in the European and Pacific theaters. They realized that the existing political structure was heavily influenced by the power of Paul Cantrell and his cronies, and they used every means to control them. The veterans knew that if they were to succeed, they had to come together and make a major challenge to the status quo. After much discussion and consideration, the veterans decided to rally around Knox Henry, an American soldier who had established himself as a leader during the North African campaign. Henry was respected throughout the community and was known for his integrity and leadership. The veterans believed that if Henry was a candidate, they could mobilize public support and pose a serious challenge to Cantrell's injustice. However, the decision was met with immediate resistance from Cantrell's machine. The military then realized that the political struggle was full of obstacles designed to limit their efforts and maintain local government's power. The Cantrell government had used long-term tactics such as voter manipulation, voter suppression, and voter fraud to ensure the victory. As the election approached, most of the veterans were routinely arrested by Cantrell's agents on false charges and stripped off their tax IDs to vote. This effort was designed to disenfranchise veterans and prevent them from challenging the status quo. Cantrell's agents loyal to the corrupt system also routinely harass and attack the union and their supporters. Candidates were threatened, voters were beaten, and in some cases, voters were killed. The atmosphere in Athens became increasingly hostile, and Cantrell's troops were determined to hold on to their power at all costs. However, the veterans refused to be intimidated. They knew that the struggle for freedom often requires great sacrifice, and they were prepared to face whatever challenges came their way. So they continued to organize and campaign, holding secret meetings so as not to alert Cantrell's agents. They spread their message of reform and justice by word of mouth, handed out flyers, and even used car speakers to broadcast a message of change throughout the city. They were now tired, and well, the time had come. Now when election day came, the situation escalated rapidly when it was confirmed that Cantrell's deputies had taken several ballot boxes to the McMinn County Jail, where they intended to manipulate the results behind closed doors. The veterans knew that this act meant an end of their efforts to reclaim their town through peaceful means. Faced with this reality, they decided to lay siege to the jail and take control of the ballots by force. They moved swiftly to secure weapons from the local National Guard armory, ensuring they were well armed for the impending confrontation. With a 2-ton truck loaded with rifles, pistols, and ammunition, they headed for the jail where Cantrell deputies had barricaded themselves inside, prepared for a fight. As the veterans approached the jail, tensions reached a fever pitch. The streets of Athens echoed with the sounds of gunfire as both sides exchanged shots. The veterans, many of whom were battle-hardened from their time in the war, used their military training to coordinate their attacks, aiming to minimize casualties while maximizing pressure on the deputies inside. The firefight raged on for hours, with bullets flying through the night as the veterans gradually tightened their grip on the jail. Despite the veterans' superior tactics and resolve, the deputies inside the jail remained defiant, refusing to surrender. They realized that if they were to force a resolution, they needed to escalate their efforts. It was at this point that they decided to use dynamite to breach the jail's defenses. The use of explosives was a calculated move intended to break the stalemate and force the deputies to relinquish control of the ballot boxes. So the following day, in the early hours of the morning, the veterans placed dynamite at the strategic points around the jail and detonated the charges. The explosions shook the town, shattering windows and sending debris flying. The force of the blasts was enough to destroy several police cars and blow open parts of the jail, leaving the deputies inside with no choice but to surrender. Realizing that they were outmatched and outgunned, the remaining deputies finally capitulated, handing over the ballot boxes to the veterans. In the wake of the Battle of Athens, the town of Athens, Tennessee, was eager to see the results of the elections and to know how things would move forward. So the first step in the process was the certification of the election results. With the ballot boxes securely in the hands of the veterans, the votes were counted accurately and transparently. The results showed a decisive victory for the GL Non-Partisan League, with Knox Henry, the candidate for sheriff, emerging as a clear winner. This victory was not just a personal triumph for Henry, but a significant moment for the entire community. It represented the will of the people who had finally managed to overcome years of voter suppression and fraud to elect a leader who genuinely represented their interests. As the news of Henry's victory spread, the long-standing political machine that had controlled McMinn County for so long began to crumble. With the veterans now in control and the support of the local population behind them, Cantrell and his cronies had little choice but to relinquish their hold on power. Cantrell quickly departed from Athens, leaving behind the remnants of a regime that had ruled through fear, intimidation, and outright criminality. His departure marked the end of an era of corruption that had tainted every aspect of life in the county. In the days and weeks that followed, the veterans worked diligently to restore trust in local government. Everything changed for the better.